So you want to learn Blender like a pro. Good. First, what is Blender? Blender is a powerful 3D visual creation tool. It's an open source program, free to download and use and create anything you want. And know that that creation is fully owned by you. My name is Alex, and in this video, I'm going to get you feeling more comfortable using Blender. The best way to learn is by doing. That's why I created a beginner's Blender series called Building Basics. In each episode, we build a simple model, add materials, lights, and animate it. The goal is to get to a final product. With each episode, you will become more comfortable and see your skills improve. After this video, go over there and check those out. Okay, for this beginner's guide, we have 5 topics: interface, preference, navigating in the 3D viewport, the tools, and stick around to the end so you can get all the hotkeys that I use and the most common ones that you're going to use. Let's jump into Blender. Here we are inside Blender. I'm going to leave a link in the description to the blender.org website so you can download the program and get more information. Once you've installed it on your computer, you're greeted to a screen like this. This box window here is called your splash screen, and it shows the version number you're using. You get to open recent files and even different file types. We're going to be using the general file type right now. And you can click anywhere within Blender to get rid of the splash screen. Let's take a look at the 3D viewport now. This is the main window that you're going to be interacting with, and it's the biggest window here. This is your 3D viewport, and this is where you can navigate around in 3D space and manipulate your objects, and anything else visually that's going on in your scene is going to be represented in the 3D viewport. Every window within Blender has its own options. On the left here, you get an icon. If you click that icon, you can change the 3D viewport to any other window. So I can just start clicking these things, and you can see that this main window changes. I could always come back here to the 3D viewport. Blender has done a fantastic job at allowing you, the artist, to set up your workspace that suits you best. So this is that icon that changes your window. Over here, you see we get this object mode. And this is very powerful. And when I was learning Blender, it took me a while to understand and get this concept that I'm going into a different mode, essentially a different task, to get something done. Then I can always come back to object mode, which is your main mode in Blender. Over here, we get some more options, and these options are specific to this window. You can see if I change the window, the options change. So those options are associated with the window that you're in. Here we get some more options. We'll look at those later on, and even more options here. These are more visual options that change how Blender looks in this viewport. Let's come on over here to this box right here. This is called your outliner. Your outliner is where you get an inventory of everything in your scene. You can see I have the cube, and then it gets highlighted there. Or I can highlight the camera, and you can see in the 3D viewport, it also gets highlighted. So it's a representation of what's in your scene. You can also change this window to any other window. I can have multiple viewports here. I can come back up here and always go to outliner. One other thing I want to mention is if you right click, you get a set of options, but you get different options in whatever window you're in. Let's keep working down in now this section. This is called our properties window. Properties is the area where you're going to make the biggest change to your scene, to your world, and to your object. This is how we make adjustments visually in the viewport and to the render. So we're going to get comfortable with the properties over time. They take a little while. There's a lot of options in there. You can see over here beside the properties, if I go out and I go back to properties, we get this menu here on the left. These are your properties. So you can click on any of these, and you can see that you get a bunch of different options. And the options change based off what you select. So if I select this cube, you can see I got more properties, more options. Let's keep working our way down here. This is your timeline, and your timeline is an animator's best friend. If you're doing effects or even some lighting, you're going to want to scrub, find different areas. So the timeline is how you move throughout time. Right now you can see we're on frame 1, and if I grab this blue handle, I can affect what frame I want to be on. So that's what your timeline is. And right here on the right, you can see that I'm on frame 73. So it's a representation of the current frame you're on. Here I can do start and end frame. You get a couple more options for playback. This is your auto key. And again, you get some options specific to this window. Okay, last thing about the interface is up here. We get this menu. This is a general menu. So if we go File, you can see we can open, save them, and do some other options. If we come on over here to Edit, we're going to go to Preferences next, so we'll come back to this option. And you get some other options, render and different windows. And over here at the Help button, you get some useful Blender links. Keep going, we have what's called workspaces. So right now by default, we're in the Layout workspace. And if we want to do, let's say, animation, you can see that my windows are changed. Shading, so all of these buttons here just get you into a different work mode, and it does that very quickly. So very useful. And then even once you pick one of these, you can make adjustments. Okay, so that's the interface of Blender. So let's go into the preferences, and then we'll come back into the 3D viewport so we can get more comfortable navigating in that space. Okay. So let's go to Edit, Preferences. So here's our preferences inside Blender. Let's start with Interface. Interface is how things are going to be displayed while you're working in Blender, in the software. So quick overview, resolution scale, you can see if I blow this up, it just makes things more readable. By default it's 1, and why didn't I go ahead and change that a little bit to 1.2 for this demonstration. You can turn off that splash screen. User tooltips, I would leave that on. So when you hover over any button, you can get the name of it. And I would even include the Python tooltips. So if you hover over something, you see you get that data underneath it. All right, let's go to themes. And themes, like interface, changes the visuals of Blender. That's all it does. So if you like a certain color or a color scheme, you can change that here. You're also able to save those and even download other people's interface colors. Let's keep going. Viewport, so object info. You can see just by clicking on them, you can see what it does. View name. I like having these on, and I really like having the frame rate. That just shows you how quick something is processing. So your frame rate should be 24 frames a second. That's what we animate to. But if it's a heavy scene, that playback might drop to 12 frames, 5 frames. So the lower the number when you're actually playing in your timeline, the lower the number, the heavier the scene, and the chuggier the animation is going to come across. Blender does a fantastic job, I think, with how quick it can read its data. So even with a heavy scene and even in EV, I can get great frame rate. All right, so moving down, I'd leave the two sizes the same as is. Next, we have the 3D viewport axis, and that's this gizmo right here. It is useful and it is handy, and I think it is beginner friendly. It lets you know what direction you're facing. You can also click on the different letters, the different axes, and get different perspectives. You can click in the middle and orbit around. But quickly I changed that to just this simple axis. I think just even navigating in here, you can see that it updates. It still gives you the letters, but no longer can I use it to navigate or to orbit in my scene. You can change the size of it and the brightness, so have a play with that. Moving on, we have lights, editing, and animation. I don't do anything for lights and editing. I don't change any of the presets. Under animation, you could change some of the options if you needed to. I leave them at default. Let's go to add-ons. And an add-on is a powerful piece of code that saves you time or allows further functionality to your workflow. Some of the add-ons come with Blender already. You can see many do, and I only have a couple turned on. So you can download different add-ons from individuals or companies for free or for pay. Next, we have input, navigation, and key map. These are options you're going to want to play with. So let's take a look at input. Input, we have enable numpad and enable 3-button mouse. These are really useful if you're working on a laptop. So I am not, so I leave those turned off. And the way I work is I work with a stylus. And this serves me well for about 99% of my tasks. And I also have a mouse that's beside me that I can use in the rare case I need to. I want to point out how I work with the stylus. Here on the mouse, you have left, middle, right click. On the stylus, it's the exact same and in that order. Left, middle, right click. It's the same thing. It's just how I use the tools. The mouse sits over here, and then I just hold my stylus in my right hand. And when I first picked up a stylus, I think pretty much everyone holds it just like a normal pen. When I picked it up, I couldn't quite, for some reason, have the muscles to hold it and then to hit the buttons with my thumb. So very quickly, the pen just went between my fingers. Now I don't have to hold it at all, it just sits there. And then with my thumb, I can just go up. So that's how I work. But looking at the inputs, there's nothing in here that I've changed from the defaults. The navigation, here I've taken maybe 20 minutes and played with it before. Here you can affect how you're interacting with 3D Viewport. So I'd have a play with this. You can always set it back to factory default if you think you messed something up. How you do that is you go to File, Defaults, and you can say Load Factory Settings. If ever you think you hit an option that messed something up and you can't figure it out, you can always reset the factory defaults. Okay, let's keep going to key mapping. Key mapping is very important. This is where I spent a bit of time just figuring out what does what and how I like to work. So in a little bit, I'll show you that. Last is System, Save and Load, and File Path. Under System, the only thing I change under Cycles Render Devices is I put it to CUDA and it just takes advantage of my machine. Further down, you also have the number of undo steps you can set it to. Then once you're happy with the preferences, you can come down here and save the preferences. You can also come on over here and load the factory default again. When you're new to Blender, go ahead and play with things. Know that you can always go back to the default. Last thing I want to show in the preferences are the changes I made to the key map. So come on over here to key map, and the first change I've made is under spacebar action. I went from play to tools. So what that does is if I come into the 3D viewport and I hit spacebar, you can see that my animation plays. I hit spacebar again and it stops. Now change it to tools, and what that does is it brings up your tools menu when you hit your spacebar. And this tools menu is identical to the one here on the left. The next changes all have to do with key configuration or your hotkeys. So 3 of them have to do with how I navigate in the 3D viewport. By default, your orbit is your middle mouse button. If you want to zoom in and out, you hit Control and middle mouse, zoom in and out. And if you want to pan left, right, up and down, it's Shift and middle mouse. I don't like the way you navigate using those buttons. I don't like that I have to go from hitting Control to Shift and not hitting it at all. So I have 3 different things I have to think about. I think that's too much. So the options I'm going to change it to, everything is going to be done with holding Alt. I'm going to hit Alt and then it's left click, middle, right. And then my thumb never has to go anywhere off the keyboard. So that's the main change so that I'm comfortable in the 3D viewport. Let's go back to our preferences, edit, preferences, and we're going to scroll down here to 3D view. At 3D view, we're going to also open up this 3D view global. So I want to change my orbit, my zoom, and my pan. This is what they're called. So we have this rotation view, we have our pan view, and we have our zoom view. There is a lot of options in here, so it's very easy to get lost. So take your time with it. As you progress using Blender, you're going to know the name of things, you're going to feel more comfortable, and you're going to feel more comfortable changing it. You can see we have 2 rotation views, the top one and the bottom one. We're going to change the bottom one. And the way I know what's the difference between these two is I come on over here to the right and I can see the hotkey associated with that action. Middle mouse, I can just test it in here and you can see it's middle mouse. I'm using my middle mouse to rotate, and this rotation view is that hotkey. Perfect, so let's click here, and what I'm going to do for my rotation view, for my orbit, is change it so that I use Alt and left click. So I'm going to come on over here and say left click. Alright, so I'm going to test that out. I no longer can do middle mouse and orbit. I have to use Alt and left click. Perfect. Let's close that. Come on over here to right below it to pan view. Open that up. Same thing, it's always going to be Alt. Get rid of the Shift, and I'm going to leave the middle mouse there. So let's test that out. I had Alt and left, which just orbits. Now I can keep my thumb on Alt and go right to the middle mouse. And all of a sudden, without ever taking my hand off that Alt button, I can very quickly navigate. Let's do the last one. The last one is this zoom view. So let's come on over here, same thing, go to Alt, get rid of the control, and under the clicks, it's gonna be right click. All right, so let's test that out now. Let's close this, and I'm hitting Alt, left click, perfect, Alt, middle click. I still just have my thumb on Alt, it never goes off, and then Alt, right click. And all of a sudden, with never moving my thumb away, I'm navigating in the 3D viewport much quicker. There's one thing that I'm going to change, and that's that last operation, the zoom. It's opposite to what I like. So here's how we change that. Give it a try, you might like it, but if you don't, this is how we change it. We can come on over here to navigation, and this invert zoom direction, we just click mouse. So now let's give it a try. Alt, left click, perfect, that still all works, middle click, right click, and that's the way I like it. So now I can very quickly just be moving around my object. And I think this, just being able to do this comfortably is such a big deal. Play with the settings from Blender, play with my settings if you're not happy with those ones, or try your own. Okay, there's two more preferences that I'm going to show you, two more hotkeys, and then we're done with the preferences. They have to do with going in and out of different views. So maybe if I'm in the animation viewport, I have my 3 panels, and then I want to go into one of the panels larger, then I want to come back out. So I love that. That's on a hotkey. And then also just playing my animation. I also have that on a hotkey. Let me show you those two. Edit, preferences. Let's go back to our key map. So the easiest way that I've found to change a hotkey is just go to the action or the button that you want, hover over it. It's going to give you the name, and most times it's going to give you the hotkey as well. So that's a great starting place. So there's two things I want to change. The first one is this play button. So I'm just going to hover over that. And you can see it's called play animation, and the shortcut is shift spacebar. So I'm going to try that. Shift spacebar, and yeah, it works. I don't like where it is. Because my navigation tools all have to do with Alt, my thumb is on Alt, I don't want to move my thumb half an inch over to the right to hit the spacebar. I don't want to do that. I want to keep my thumb on Alt all the time. And so from there I can move my other fingers around. And so what I'm going to assign that shift spacebar, I'm going to assign it to Alt and that little squiggly line beside the 1 on the keyboard. The easiest way to do that, now that we know the name and the hotkey that exists for that action already, is to search it up. So, animation. And mine was called play animation, and so you can see that there's 2. And the one I'm affecting is shift spacebar. Already we can get to the preference, the hotkey, very quickly by knowing that information and then searching for it. So let's maximize this. And I said I want it to be Alt, so I'm going to say Alt, get rid of Shift. You can come on over here, so it can be click like we did for our orbit. But if you have it under press, which it is already, then what I can do is press that button, and now on my keyboard I'm going to press any button I want. Let's check that out. Okay. It works just like I want. And the reason I change it again is just to keep everything on Alt. The way I navigate and those key hotkeys, I want it all there so I'm working very quick. The last thing I want to do is to go in and out of my view quickly. So again, let's figure out what that action is called. Let's close this. And we come up here to window, we can see we get some options. And the one that I want is this toggle window full screen. That's not actually the right one, but it gets us close enough. So if I click on it, you can see it made it bigger. It's not quite what I wanted, but at least it gives us an idea where to start. So let's go back to our preferences. And what was that called? Toggle. So let's just search for toggle or for full screen or window, one of those keywords. So let's see what we get. Toggle selected, screen, toggle. Okay, maybe this is it. Toggle quad view, toggle max area. There's already a couple hotkeys here. Control spacebar. Let's give that a try. That's the one. We're going to open that up. Still Alt, just like all the other ones. Get rid of Control. Cool. And now I'm going to hit the spacebar, and I want it to be my Q button. So I'm going to just say Q. I'm going to close this, and let's take a look at the 5 hotkey changes that we made. So now I can very quickly just navigate in my 3D viewport. I can play my animation, stop my animation, and go in and out of full screen, all while always holding Alt. My thumb never goes off Alt. So now, especially if you're animating, I can check that animation, stop it, navigate around, go into the viewport, come back out, all while that's being held down. So we talked about our preferences. Now let's take a more in-depth look at the 3D viewport. Some of the hotkeys for the 3D viewport. T brings up your tools menu, and N brings up some more options for the scene and for specific objects. Okay, if you hit them again, they go away. Let's bring back our tools options. So T, and let's talk about them. You can see this tool is highlighted blue. That's our selection tool. There's 4 ways to select in Blender. If you hold down on this tool, you can see there's 4 options. And the hotkey for that is W, the hotkey for the selection tool. And you can see that I can just keep hitting W and it cycles through the different icons up there. There's only one selection tool that I like, and that's the select box. Just like that. If somehow I am on a different selection tool, I'll just keep cycling through, hitting W until I get to the right one. Below that is your 3D cursor. So I can click that and you can see I'm affecting the placement of this cool looking bullseye. At the beginning, this was very frustrating to me. And for months, I didn't want to like it. And then I liked it. And now I love it. So the reason I like it is because really this 3D cursor is a placement in space. You can see if I bring up my options by hitting N on my right side here, and I go to view, you can see there's this thing called 3D cursor, and here we have some values. So as I'm moving this 3D cursor, the values in space are updated. That's very important. I can set that 3D cursor and I can set pivots from there. I can have things created from that pivot. The 3D cursor is very valuable. I'm coming from the software Maya, and I've used that for 17 years. And now, knowing that this 3D cursor is a thing in Blender, I miss it in Maya. So, very powerful. If you want to put your 3D cursor back, you can always just select that, zero it out, enter, and it's back to its world origin. There's a hotkey to do that, so I'll show you that under the hotkeys. Okay, let's keep going. Now we have our move tool, so let's select an object. We have our move tool, our rotation, and our scale. I like visually seeing these things. The hotkeys for those are G to move or to grab. And then once you do that, you can click, left click, and it places it. R to rotate, and S to scale. Those are the hotkeys for those 3 buttons. Another way to move, and I know a lot of people do, is G, and then you pick one of the 3 axes. You can see up here, Z, X, and Y. Just type one of those letters, and now it goes along that axis. I've tried that, but I don't like that method of moving objects. I'm just going to reset this to its origin. The way I like to manipulate my objects is by actually pulling on these tools over here. But I don't want to come on over here to select it. So here's what I do. If you hover over the tool, it says spacebar G, not just G. So I gave that a try. So here, G to grab, G to move, right click to cancel its movement. But if I hit spacebar, you can see G, which looks the same as your tools menu. But now what it does is it actually brings up your tool, your gizmo. So what I do now is whenever I want to manipulate my object, is I just hit spacebar G, spacebar R, spacebar S. And it's one motion, spacebar G, spacebar R, spacebar S. And that's the way I've been working for the last good while. And I really like it. So give that a try. Okay, coming down here, we got a couple more things. This is a universal transform. You can see it has everything. I don't like seeing it. My boy, my son, he likes seeing it. He's learning Blender as well. So he's comfortable with this. And I'm trying to get him to use my method. Okay, next thing, we have 3 more tools. We have this annotation tool. We can draw. Very useful. I don't use it that much. Okay, I can undo. If you do use it a lot, and how do I get rid of them after you've done some other things, you can go back into your options here, and you can see you have this one option, annotations. You can just click this minus, and it's gone. You can also make a new annotation, and then you can change the color, and so it is very powerful. I just don't use it that much. And then N is our measurement tool. So you can measure things. I think that's very cool. I've used it quite a bit. And then this is new as of a couple of releases ago. This is a really quick way to just create different shapes. Yeah, just a fun way to block out a scene or just build something very quick. Cool, I'm just gonna delete all those. Awesome, so those are the tools. And I showed you how I like to still bring up my tool, but not go over there always. Okay, on the right side of things with N, let's start right here, view. View, now you can see when I manipulate the object itself, I can see the values here, so very useful. Tools, I don't really use this much. The view is very important. Here you can see the focal length of the camera, and this is just our perspective camera, just the default camera that comes in. I think that's really cool. Clipping plane is if maybe there's some objects, geometry right on top of each other and the images are flickering, all you have to do is bump that up to 0.1 and it stops it. If I, let's say, go to 10, you can see that as I get closer, it clips into the object. So that clipping plane is useful as well when you're rendering things out. If it's a big scene and I have to zoom out, but I still need to see more, I'll just go ahead and add one more zero or two more zeros. So that's the clipping plane. It's just what your camera can see at certain ends of its field of view. Cool, and then right in here, this is an add-on I added, this screencast, and you can see that's how you can see what I'm doing down here. Okay, so those are the tools. Let's keep coming up here. We talked about the different windows that you can do. We're specifically looking at the 3D viewport, just getting you comfortable navigating in this viewport. Let's zoom into our scene here. And the way you do that is by hitting period numpad. I changed that myself to F, to frame. When I'm in the 3D viewport and I'm in object mode, I like to hit F. I'm just used to it for framing. But you can see it doesn't work because I didn't set it. But know that that's an option, a shortcut that I've done myself. But if you don't want to do that, it's period numpad. That zooms in, or that frames in to what you've selected. Select the box or select an object. And let's come on over here to this mode. By default, we're in object mode. You can see there's many different modes, and you can think of object mode as the highest level, and everything else, all the other modes kind of fit into different aspects of this object mode. If I go to edit mode, you can see all of a sudden the object, the visual representation of this cube changed. I'll go back to object, back to edit. Let's go to something else as well. Paint, texture. So there's all these different modes that allow you to manipulate your object in different ways. And when you come back out into object mode, you see all of those changes. So the only thing I can do in object mode is affect the whole shape all at once. I can G to move it. You can see it moves the whole thing. R. So everything just affects the shape universally. I can't actually make any changes to the model itself besides those three things. Just gonna put it back to origin. I'll go over hotkeys in just a minute. When I go into edit mode, all of a sudden it's changed, and you can see more tools came up as well. So under edit mode, now I can actually affect the model in a way I could before in object mode. So the hotkey to go into the different modes is tab. Perfect. And a reason also why I chose Alt Q and Alt, that squiggly line, for playing my animation and coming in and out of my view is because it's close to tab as well. I use tab a lot, and I know everyone does. Tab is how we go from mode to mode. So now you can see I'm back in object mode. With the object affected the way I did in edit mode, I'm back in object mode, and I can't change the vertices, those dots anymore. I can only change the position, the rotation, and the scale of the object on a global effect. Let's go back into edit mode with tab. Once you're in edit mode, there are three ways to affect your model. You can see these dots. These dots are called vertex or vertices. Those are the different points. And again, you can manipulate them and move them around. The next way to manipulate your object is through edges. So over here, we get these three icons: vertex, edges, faces. So we are on vertex to begin with, which are these dots. Between these two dots is this one line. That line is called an edge. So if I click on that, I can no longer select the dots. I can only select those lines. I can still move those around. So now it affects 2 points at one time. I can now rotate that as well and scale it. Whereas if it was a vertex by itself, I wouldn't be able to do that. But if I select 2 vertex, I can do that. So even while I have these 2 selected, I can switch between the 2 or between the 3 selections. The hotkeys for those are 1, 2, 3. You can see up here that they're changing. 1, 2, 3, just up here. So those are the hotkeys, 1, 2, 3. And let's take a look at faces. Faces is any 3 edges that meet. That space between those 3 edges is called a face. In this case, there's 4 edges. And same thing, I can move the edge, or pardon me, I can move the face, I can scale it, and I can rotate it. So that goes over edit mode. Remember, edit mode is I can affect the shape on a finer scale, and then I can go back into object mode. So we're going to be using that a lot. I'm not going to go over the different modes because those become a little more specific. All right, let's go back into object mode. Okay, so let's continue across the top. So view, these are just options that change things visually within your workspace. Selection, different ways to select. Add, you can start to add different primitives. These are called primitives from mesh. You can add curves and a whole bunch of different things. That building basics tutorial that I'm creating for beginners goes over these quite well, and we use them a lot. So have a look at those. I think they're going to be very helpful. An object is specific to this object that you have selected. So if I go ahead and create a new object, the changes I make on this object are specific to this one. So if I zoom in here and just say mirror, you can see that it had an effect, a very small effect, just on this object. If I select this object, mirror, it does that only on this object. Next, what we're going to look at is this global button over here. What that is your orientation. So your orientation is identified right here. You can see this red line, this green line, and blue. X, Y, Z. Those are your 3 axes in this world environment. And you can see they're also represented on the grid here. And so when I select an object, you can see that these arrows come up with the colors, also corresponding to the colors and direction of our gizmo up there. So you can see X is pointing to the left, and so is that to the left. Y, when I rotate my camera, is now to the left. So let's say I rotate this object, and I come back to my G tool. You can see that it's still, X-axis is still pointing in that direction. But now if I come on over here and change it to local, you can see that its local orientation is different. So it's important to know that an object can either take the world orientation, the way it's pointing, or its own orientation. And then there's a couple other orientations. Normals. Normal is what the face is pointing towards. The face, so when we go into edit mode and I select this face, that face has a direction. That's its orientation. Gimbal, I don't really use that. I don't really use the other 3. I'll use global and local a lot, and 5-10% of the time I'll use gimbal. Or pardon me, I'll use normal. Coming over here, we have these very useful pivot points. By default, we're on this medium point. I'll switch between medium, individual, and 3D cursor. I'll use these 3. So right now, when I'm manipulating my object, the point right here is in the very middle of this object. Not anymore because I manipulated the object, I pulled vertices. But let's come on over here. You can see that this one is in the middle of this object, that point. So we can change where that pivot happens. So if I come on over here, I can say 3D cursor. All of a sudden, I can rotate that object from a different point. Now what's really powerful about this cursor is if I move the cursor and then I rotate that object, you can see it's rotating from that cursor. Or if I want to go back to its medium point, I can do that. If I had a lot of these, let me duplicate this one. Shift D, Shift D. So now if I select 3 of these, minus the light, If I select 3 of these, I can move them together. I can rotate them as one unit. But with this other option, individual origins, they all rotate around their own centers. So those 3 are very powerful. You can do some great things with them. Then we have the snap 2. And the 2 that I use most is increment and vertex. So let me show you an example of that. Let me delete these 3. Let's bring in a cube. Oh, I brought it in, so it brings it at the cursor. Let me delete that. We can bring back the cursor to its origin by hitting Shift S, cursor to world origin. Now Shift A, cube. You'll get more comfortable with all these hotkeys. I want to show what this increment does. So I can move my cube down an axis, but if I hold Control, it's going to snap every unit height. Let me just show that in an orthographic view, in the side view. You can see these grid lines over here. Each box, each grid line is a unit in space. And if I hit Control and then pull it up, it snaps to those grid lines. Very useful. But now, if I change this to vertex, it's going to snap to a vertex. So what I like to do is hit G, the grab, the move tool, and then hit Control, and then bring my mouse to an object that I want to snap it to. And there you go, it snapped it to there. So very useful, that option. And then you also have snap width, the closest, center, so play with those as well. Last thing up here in the central tool options is this proportional editing. So I can turn that on or off. And what that is, if I go into edit mode, this is where I switch from my pen to my mouse because I like to use the scroll wheel. It's really built for that. Here we go. Now using my mouse, I'm going to turn on the tool, proportional editing, and I'm going to just move it around, and you can see it has this circle. Anything inside that circle gets affected. So now with that still left click still clicked, I can scroll on my middle mouse, and you can see that it starts to affect other things within that sphere of influence. So very useful, and that's how you do it. Let's take a look at these corner tools here. These blue ones, are just visual representations. If I even just select or click the blue, you can see it just hides information on screen. If I click into the arrow, you can refine what's visible. Same with this one. Perfect. Again, you can refine what's visible. So I use that quite a bit when I'm setting up my animation window. I want it to be as clean as possible. Over here, these are your viewport displays. So this first one, this X-ray, and I can see through the model. Very useful. That is also useful when you want to select things. So if I want to select it right now, I can see through the model and I can actually select that back vertex. If I don't have that on and I just deselect and do that again, you can see that that back vertex wasn't selected. Let's do it over here. I select it, it wasn't selected. But now I'll come back up here. The hotkey for that is Alt-Z, and I can select everything through the model. So very useful. Then we have this wireframe, so we can see really the construction of the object. This is your shade mode, this is your materials, and then this is your render. Okay, so those are the 3 options there. And then for each option that you choose, you get more options to refine the viewport display. Yeah, have a play with that. It's very fun, and everyone's different with their tastes. Okay, that does it for the 3D viewport. Next, let's take a look at the different tools. Let me tab out of edit into object mode. We talked about the tools on the left side. We talked about the different tools and options on the right side. Let's talk about some of these tools. Your properties, again, they're different attributes that can affect your world, your scene, or your object. And because they can affect these things, I think it's nice to think of them as tools. I think the tool that's easiest to understand because it's visual is the modifier properties, which is this wrench over here. So let's see what we can do. We can select our object. I'm just going to center it back to its world origin. And now I'm on this modifier properties, and you get a lot of options. I think the easiest ones to understand are this generate. Start there and then explore from there. So let's just give it a bevel. You can see it affected the shape, the object, but if I click back into the object and tab, you can see that the vertex aren't smooth, or the edges aren't smooth. So these modifiers are non-destructive. So here we go, let's add a couple more, and you can mix and match them and just start adding more. And all of a sudden, very quickly, you can add a whole bunch of modifiers and get something very interesting. So have a play with those, spend half a day just exploring all of that. And then if you don't like it, you can just hit X, and you can see your object is still there. That, I think, is a very powerful tool, and it's called the modifier properties. You get a couple more here. We're not really going to dive into any of these for now. Another big one is you want to add some color. So this right here is your material property. You can click new. That adds a different material. And go ahead and to base color, go ahead and just add a color. You don't see it here because we're in shaded viewport, but come on over here to your shader. And all of a sudden you can see your object has color. So this is a fun way just to start playing with color and seeing things kind of come together quickly. So very cool when you can do that. Those two things are very important. All of them are important, but these two properties, I think as tools, are easy to understand and do a lot to your scene. And that's really it for the tools within this viewport. But now if we select an object, tab into it, all of a sudden you can see we have more tools. These are your modeling tools. Some of the common ones you're going to use, if I go to faces, 3, select the face, and then over here we have this extrude button, and you can just pull that out. And all of a sudden it made a whole nother section. I'm going to hit W just to get rid of that tool. Remember, I use W a lot just to get rid of tools so I don't see them anymore. I can select another face, and now I'm going to show you some hotkeys. All of these tools are here, but I think I want to get you used to hotkeys. I'll show you one more and then I'll go to hotkeys. This insert face, very useful. Basically what it does is it takes that shape, sucks it down, and then creates 4 other faces. So let's start using some hotkeys here. E is your extrude, I is your insert face. Just using those together, you can work very quickly. So I, E, and all of a sudden I'm making a little robot or whatever my creature is. Here's this little neck, I can scale that. I don't want that proportional editing, so I can turn that off. I can scale that in. E again for his little neck, and then E one more time. Right click now to cancel its movement. Boop, scale, and E. And all of a sudden we built a very cool little guy. Okay, let's go back into edit mode. And then so you have a whole bunch of tools here. So we have E and I. E to extrude, I to insert a face, and that combination works really well together. Sometimes you want more definition, and that's Control R, and you can see this line just appears, this yellow line. We're adding a row, and then typically once I have that, I right click, and it sets that row in the very middle of that edge. This is the tool right here, and again, you can just hover over a tool, it tells you the hotkey. So go and explore, break things, see what the hotkey is. You'll know after a while what you use a lot, and you'll just start remembering those hotkeys. That's it for most of the common tools you're going to need. So the last section is the hotkeys. I've put an image of most of the common hotkeys that I use and that you're going to use. Have a look through this and see what you like and what works for you. That's it for this tutorial. If you have any questions, leave a comment below and I'll get back to you. I hope you got a lot of value from this video. If you did, please like the video so that I know I'm doing a good job. Now that you have some basic understanding of Blender and some skills, go check out those Building Basic episodes so you can incrementally improve. Alright everybody, best of luck, bye bye.